Great, I think that's probably a good place to start then. So thank you to everyone who has dialed in today. We've got a really exciting session lined up with a full panel of speakers. I know some of you may have seen that we originally had Sharad and Karen down to speak, but we've also got Alison joining us here. And in a few moments, we'll also have video with us as well. So just to sort of set the scene, my name's Henry Phillipson. I work at a venture capital firm called Berengier. I'm also one of the co-founders of ESG. If you don't know us already, we're an organisation of VC firms who work together to help early stage companies to measure and improve their ESG performance. Part of that work obviously involves providing useful guidance on issues like diversity and inclusion. So for today's session, we're going to be looking at how to drive greater ethnic diversity across startup boards. And we've got a great lineup of speakers to help us to unpack that topic. And for today's session, we've also partnered up with a fantastic group called Empowering People of Colour, or EPOC, which is a network of senior leaders of colour who try to address the persistent lack of diversity across boards. And so just a couple of quick points of housekeeping. So we're obviously hosting today's session as a webinar on Zoom. So you can obviously see and hear us, hopefully, but you won't be able to see and hear each other as the attendees. We do, however, have the chat open. We've obviously got the Q&A function open as well. We would encourage you to ask lots of questions of the panel. We'll try and pick those up at about 4:30. So please do engage as much as you possibly can. We've got lots of knowledge and expertise across the group, and it'd be great to hear from you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. So maybe Sharad, could I just ask you to do a quick 30-second intro for the group?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Henry. I am a sort of private equity investor, founded and was a partner at a firm called Large Point Capital. I sit on a tech fund board called Itrium, or previously called Digital Plus Partners. It is a European firm investing 750 million of assets into B2B technologies. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about this important topic.
Great, and maybe then Karen.
Thanks. I'm Chief Investment Officer for Berengier, the same firm that Henry's with. We're a VC with about 900 million under management. Yes, and sit on a number of boards and invest in early stage companies.
Fantastic. And then Alison.
I'm Alison Robinson. I'm a partner in the Heidrick & Struggles London office. I lead our work in consumer tech globally and do a lot of work in early stage businesses as well as private equity backed businesses.
Great. And just to flag to all of our attendees, we will have Vidya joining us from Moonshot shortly, and hopefully she can introduce herself properly then. But I think it's probably worth us just sort of diving into the conversation. Sharad, I think I'm just going to turn to you to sort of set the scene and maybe get the ball rolling on some questions for the panel.
Sure. Thank you, Henry. So, welcome to this webinar. It's a pleasure to have all of you. I just want to start with, just setting the scene here slightly, which is I went back and looked at some data on, the population of the US, the UK, the sort of people who identify with an ethnic minority background in these two sort of areas. And I looked back over the last 30 years. And what I found was that, 30 years ago in 1990, there were about 500,000 people, 300,000 to be precise, out of 57 million people in the UK who identifies as ethnic minority. Today, it is more like 11 million out of 66 million. So that's a huge jump. Similarly, in the US, 2 out of 10 people identified as ethnic minority 40 years ago, and today it's 4 out of 10. The point being that America, UK, and indeed Europe are all increasingly becoming much more diverse. In the boardroom, where these major decisions have to be made, diversity of opinion, experience, judgments are very important. Why are they important? They're important because they help drive better decision making. What does that do? That helps create value. So to be able to sort of recognize the world we're in and where we're heading, I think is incredibly important. And for all startups and indeed listed companies and all corporates in the world, this is a topic which is becoming increasingly important. I would also say, go one step further to say, it is more representative of the society we live in, and a society where, employees, customers, stakeholders, investors, all of us are looking to sort of, effectively achieve superior excellence. The way to do that is by embracing this topic. So with that in mind, I wanted to sort of open up the floor to Karen and Alison. My first sort of question here is to Karen, which is, do venture capitalists and founders, based on your experience, Karen, see value in having ethnic diversity talent on their board?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely, in the main. Of course, there are some exceptions, but yes, in the main, I think most people either explicitly have it on an agenda or just would prefer to have some, both probably gender, ethnic diversity across the board, both on the management team at the board level. But I would say when it comes to startups and as ESG VC, I mean, Henry referred to that a little bit earlier. It's an initiative in the venture capital industry to try and help early stage companies focus on what their ESG footprint in the whole looks like. And this is a subsection of that. While it's important, it's top of mind, nobody's kind of fighting against it. The idea of putting time, effort, resources, and money into something when you're really struggling just to keep the lights on and to make payroll next month, it's a really difficult thing to balance in a bunch of priorities. And the truth is, if we're the investor and the company's trying to decide whether we, hire a sustainability officer, for example, or we spend time and effort and money trying to look at diversifying our board versus making payroll next month, it's always going to be payroll next month. And it's not because we don't see the importance of it and we don't believe that there's a payback and we're kind of already advocates. It's just because there's a question about how do we allocate time, money, and resources. However, I do think when we are looking to recruit and we are looking to bring people onto the boards, it's definitely in the agenda. And I think, Alison, maybe I could ask you to jump in because I think you had some thoughts and ideas about when it starts on the agenda, when people are looking to expand either the management team or the board, where it ends up at the end of the process. Oh, you're muted. You're still muted.
Classic. Yeah, of course. Thanks, Karen. So certainly we're increasingly seeing more VC-backed businesses and more private equity-backed businesses thinking about bringing on external boards earlier and including in that ethnic diversity. Now, I would say what we're seeing is it's important. It's not critical in terms of how people are looking at it. And it's certainly at the start of a process, we are asked to ensure a diverse slate of candidates at every stage of the process. What we do find, though, is that criticality becomes important, not critical, over time. And one of the things I can do, and we can talk about this more later, as you think about if you work with an external partner, making it critical at every stage of the process and really saying, we need a long list that has diversity, we need a short list that has diversity, and ensuring that you have that optionality, even at the end of a process, not just at the beginning, becomes incredibly critical if you make that a priority and you want to ensure diversity at the board level.
Excellent. I want to take the opportunity, Henry, perhaps to sort of introduce Vidya at this stage.
Perfect, thanks, Shara. Vidya, over to you. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Yes. I'm so sorry for joining a few minutes late. Hi, everyone. My name is Vidya Ralingam. I am co-founder and co-CEO of Moonshot. We are a company that builds technology to analyze and intervene to stop online harms. And Karen is an investor director on our board. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here. And thanks so much for having me.
Thanks. So Vidya, without further ado, I'm going to sort of jump into, a question for you, which is the topic we were talking about was, do VCs and founders value, people who identify with an ethnic minority background on their boards? So for you, I would like to ask you, do you believe that diversity has a direct impact in your sort of business, in your sort of evolution of what you're doing, and ultimately in being able to grow and succeed?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on this question, and I might start by just saying my career before starting Moonshot was in the security and counterterrorism industry. So I have almost always, throughout my career, been either the only woman or the only ethnic minority in the room. And I only recently realized actually how unique it was to have a multi-ethnic and multi-gender founding duo. So, I'm a co-founder and also a co-CEO, and I run my organization with a wonderful co-founder named Ross Brennett, who is a white man. I'm absolutely convinced that our very different backgrounds as leaders are actually one of our greatest strengths and have contributed to the growth of the business. I think at Moonshot, perhaps in part because it starts with the founding duo and the fact that diversity and the recognition that diversity is critical to our success. Perhaps because that was integral to my partnership with Ross. We have always thought of diversity as being critical to the success of the business. And as we took our first investment round, and as we were composing our first board that went beyond myself and Ross, thinking about the composition of the board and thinking about diversity from a multifaceted perspective, not just thinking about ethnicity, was critical. I think there will be some things that are obvious to people in this room, that diversity, and perhaps they are obvious, perhaps they're not, that diversity fuels more innovation, difference of experiences and viewpoints and perspectives. But one point that I can't make enough is that diversity, from my perspective, is increasingly being seen as a market advantage, which means that it actually generates opportunities. And this might not simply be because it's a tick box exercise, and certainly in America, engaging with the US government, US government is one of our largest client bases. Engaging with them as a customer, there are advantages to being a woman or ethnic minority owned business, and they have set asides in their budgets for those businesses. So, there is a tick box aspect to this. But increasingly, I think the market advantage in some industries comes from the recognition that lack of diversity has so often led to utter failures that have been bad for business. And coming from the security and the counterterrorism industry, a sector and an industry that has so often failed, where private companies in that space have so often failed by overlooking the impacts of their products and services on minorities. It's actually become a business and market advantage to be able to show that we've considered diversity in the composition of the business and in terms of the leadership and setting direction of the business.
Right. Yeah, no, very interesting. Market advantage and opportunities, right? So have you talked about, businesses that don't embrace diversity don't have that advantage. Can you give us an example, perhaps, where you may have seen that, just to sort of put you slightly on the spot?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't name names and I won't name exact other businesses, but I can give you an example of where, as a company that works to generate insights related to security threats in the field of counterterrorism or the wider security landscape, I have oftentimes seen companies that have failed to scale products that conceive of threats in ways that are actually fundamentally discriminatory or that disproportionately and unnecessarily target minorities. I'll give a very crude example. I've seen products that have utterly failed in our market, which show maps of where the ethnic minorities live as data that our customers should be interested in when they're trying to understand the risk landscape across a particular country or province or area. And that really, that's not just about leadership. That's also about product design and understanding and building subject matter expertise into product design. But it's maybe a crude example of where diversity actually very directly links to the success of your product.
Fantastic. Yeah, great example. Thank you. I want to come back to Karen on a sort of follow-up question on, the point you made, Karen, about, paying payroll or thinking about sort of hiring people on the board. The sort of key priority for startups is paying payroll. And I think that's all very fair and absolutely well understood. So I suppose the question is, at what stage do these startups, and there are all very different versions of startups, they're, pre-seed, seed, A, B, C, D, etc. At what stage, or do you feel that at a certain stage, this sort of topic of being able to embrace diversity, ethnic diversity starts becoming more important?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it becomes more or less important. It's really just at what point do I have the resources to be able to spend time on it? And as a CEO, often it's once you have more of a complete management team around you. And you can focus on, rather than firefighting and being reactive, to a lot more of the proactive planning types of things. It also matters when a company is at a good enough level of maturity that you kind of have your brand and your personality, because that's what's going to help you recruit. And a lot of, in the very early stages, companies are still trying to figure out what it is that they stand for, and products might pivot, brands might pivot, they might respond to feedback from the market. So I think it's when you've got the resources around you to be more proactive. And then also once you've got your kind of the company and the brand and the product established enough to be able to attract people. I think one of the biggest challenges is also kind of, where do you go? And I might turn this one back to you, Sharad, and probably Alison. A lot of the things that the founders struggle with is when we're thinking about building out the board, or even exec roles, but non-exec roles especially, the first place we start is within the network that we know. Because I've been doing this for 16 years. Henry's been around the block with Berengia. We have a network of people that have been great for the companies that we work with. We've also had worked with people who aren't great, and we know to kind of avoid them in the next situation. But for the most part, we recycle great people. When we start to step out of that, so either somebody in our network is not already available, or it's not quite the relevant expertise, then we might look elsewhere to somebody like Alison, or we might look to referrals from the industry, et cetera. I think the challenge is we're all fishing from the same pool of people who tend to look and come from the same backgrounds. So if we want to break out of that, I think that's where we sometimes struggle with, where do we even go to do it? And the mandate is always going to be the best person for the job over specifically taking either gender or ethnic diversity. But there's also a significant frustration across the board, in that we know that there is someone of color who is great for this job. It's not that there's just a white man or a white woman who could do this job really well. There is someone, we just don't know where to go find them. So I think any expertise and guidance, and maybe Alison, I'll ask you and then come back to Sharad on, where do we go?
Well, I think the first thing to say is you need to be really clear on what you need. So this is not a generic board seat. It's, what are we trying to do? How are we supporting founders, CEOs? What is the exact skill set we're looking for? And that starts to open up additional channels of where you might find talent. Certainly networks are hugely important, but networks do tend to circle back to the people they already know. So organizations like EPOC become hugely important for providing a new, another route and channel for real talent to be seen. Headhunters do find new people consistently and bring new people to the table. And that goes back to the point I was making earlier of, if you are working with a headhunter, hold their feet to the fire on ensuring diversity to the last moment. But I think it is about being really clear that you want a specific skill set, and you are looking for someone who brings a diverse perspective and diverse background jointly. Because it isn't a tick the box exercise. It really needs to be about the value the person brings and the expertise they bring.
Yes, and I think I agree with you completely, Alison, and I agree with Karen as well, that there is somebody out there who is a person of color, but who is very difficult to sort of find and know, and sort of, time is of the essence, and, all these priorities come in. So let me give you an example of how, Digital Plus Partners, or Atrium, as they're called now, sort of thought about, sort of creating a network. They have a very big advisory partner group from industry, corporates effectively. It's one of their unique selling points to sort of raise money and tap into the BMWs and Lyfts and other sort of partners in the world. Now, those are, I would call them first level networks, right? Friends of theirs, contacts of theirs from their previous roles, etc. Now, when somebody like I come into their board, if I have a bunch of people who I know, and, the likelihood is, if I'm a person of color, probably I'm going to have a bunch of other people who I probably know, who are good in the industry, then I've made a few suggestions to them, and they've taken those on board, put them on their list, made an effort to introduce them. And whether it's in sales, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in effectively product development or tech. And I think the initiative comes back to some of us who possibly need to sort of raise the awareness, make the introductions, if we find good people, and then see if they can sort of, be introduced to various sort of GPs and venture capital firms. Look, nothing might come out of it, but one doesn't try, one doesn't know. So moving on to the next point then, we talked about some of the inhibitors. We talked about, payroll's a priority. We talked about various other things. Now, the one question I would like to just find out from the panel here is, in the UK, certainly, there is this Parker review. All of you are familiar with that. It requires it sets sort of recommendations and then targets. And those targets have, certainly for the FTSE 100 listed boards and the FTSE 250 listed boards, been quite well received over the last 5-6 years. Have you seen or heard of forums or other places where, something of this nature is being done for the startup community? Karen.
I can't say that. I think talking to you guys is one of the places that we turn to. There are a couple of initiatives of this ilk, and Henry, I wonder if we might be able to put any or share any other organizations that we've worked with or come across in some of the web chat. But I wouldn't say that it feels well developed by any stretch. It feels like it's at the very beginning of the journey rather than a mature organization. And I think it's still some of the really practical advice of where to go and where to look. I think Alison, what you said about really being, especially if we're going to go to somebody like you, who's an expert in finding these people, being really specific about what we need is really helpful. But if we wanted to go try and build out our network so that we had a kind of a ready pool of people that we could tap into, we struggle. And I think the more practical advice we can find, and talking to somebody like Sharad, you're more likely to have within your network people who are highly qualified, either ethnic minorities or people of color, because you've been spending time doing this more than we have. I think trying to find one or two of those super connectors and then proactively asking is one of the areas that's been probably the most fruitful.
Yeah, Vidya, any thoughts?
I broadly agree with a lot of the points that were made about how we need to be intentional about diversity, and I think targets are a very positive move, and I think the results of that are quite clear from that report. I'm thinking a little bit about startups and smaller companies and what this looks like, and I missed the earlier conversation about payroll, but I think the overall point kind of resonates with me, because with all the good intention and goodwill in the world, it can be small. It can be perhaps sometimes even more challenging for a small business to hit these kinds of targets than it can be for a larger company. I think a little bit about outside of board composition, I think about how we assess diversity within Moonshot. We do have diversity metrics as an organization that our director of people and culture kind of manages, monitors. We do an anonymous survey every year to assess diversity within the company, and to also make sure we're not making any assumptions on what diversity means just based on what people look like or what we know about them and what they're vocal about in terms of their identity. And the results of that survey surprise me every year, because I like to think of our organization as being diverse. But when I look at the results, we're a small business. When I look at the results, I oftentimes end up walking away thinking, gosh, we actually have a real problem here. And as a small business, given that every single tier in the organization, if we're looking at the junior most staff all the way up to our senior directors, at the topmost tier, we're talking about a very small number of individuals. So I'm not offering any great solutions here, more just to acknowledge that it can be challenging. I don't think that's a reason not to do it. I actually, on the contrary, think we just need to work harder towards it. And perhaps maybe one of the things I would encourage everyone here to do is have more conversations about it, because I think it can sometimes be challenging to talk about ethnic diversity openly. You don't want to end up in a position where you're tokenizing candidates. So even talking about this in the context of reviewing candidates for a role or reviewing candidates for a board membership, there is a risk that we end up just tokenizing individuals. So again, I feel like I'm offering more problems than solutions, but I don't think it's a reason not for us to focus on this and try and solve these problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a solution. I don't know how effective that might be, but I can tell you that I am a member of the community of sort of people of color. The name of the community is called Empowering People of Color, and we have in the UK a list of very capable people who, in my view, are board ready. Many of them, some of them need to sort of get trained up more, perhaps go into observership roles first. But I think organizations such as ours, where I am a member, and this is founded by Moni, who has very kindly sort of asked me to sort of chair this meeting today, is a very helpful forum because it's a not-for-profit organization. It is a peer-to-peer networking organization. And we have made introductions to each other through which people have effectively got roles. Now, it hasn't actually, I don't know if the stats are for startups or not, but certainly for bigger organizations, corporates, charities, not-for-profit organizations, I think organizations like ours can play some role in helping solve this sort of equation. What do you think, Karen?
You're muted, Karen.
I apologize. I was saying brilliant things. No, I was largely agree. I think you're right. I think I do think that the really practical and pragmatic, like I think the organization, EPOC as an organization is probably the best and one of the kind of most progressed organizations we have found. But I would suggest that even there, it's still relatively nascent and it's still working. And I kind of keep coming back to the really practical aspects of where do we go? Is there a bank of CVs I can look at when we're looking for somebody? Or is there a place that I can go where I can say, to Allison's point, we need this kind of a spec, who can direct me to someone of color? And even if we were to go into kind of LinkedIn and start finding or trying to do a headhunting exercise ourselves, we don't necessarily know what the ethnic diversity is. So yeah, I think the more we have organizations that can be really pragmatic and practical about we can help you do this proactively and we know exactly where to go, as opposed to necessarily the concept or the theory of it, or we can help you kind of spec things out or think about it or set your targets or goals, the better. And I feel like that's still something that, while EPOC is by far the most progressed, something that's still a challenge for us.
Sure. Allison, your thoughts simply, you've got, your business is one of search and you see candidates, every day, all the time. How do you and your organization go about thinking about this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think headhunting firms have a real responsibility here. And certainly one of the things that we take massive responsibility for as individuals, as well as a collective, is building our own networks of talent that are ethnically diverse and bring a different perspective as well, potentially. So there's a responsibility that we have. We are supporting organizations like EPOC, obviously, but ultimately, I think this is a partnership. So we have a responsibility to dig deeper, to work harder on behalf of our clients, to ensure that we're providing long lists and short lists that have full diversity of all kinds. But we also look to partners like EPOC, Sharad, who are building a community and building a network.
Right, and I know that because I know that EPOC have sort of done events with yourselves, and you've been very grateful with your time and your sort of partners' times, colleagues' times, and I can tell you firsthand that I have found the network, the access, the contacts really, really helpful. So I think not just headhunters, but founders who are kind of listening on this webinar as well should have a look at EPOC, should take a note, and sort of, we've got a pool of talent. It might sort of be for them, it might not be for them, but certainly we have a pool of extremely sort of valuable talent. Look, we're coming to the end of this session. Before we take questions, I want to sort of wrap up the session with sort of perhaps one final, shall I say, throwaway. And maybe this is about, if all of you could think of one kind of suggestion to make, the challenge of getting people of ethnic diversity on boards easier, if we had to break the barriers somewhat, what should we all be doing as a collective to sort of help this? And it's not going to happen overnight, we know that, but nevertheless, what do we think can be done? One sort of recommendation from each of you, please. So I don't mind who goes first. Vidya, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. I, for one, am actually very grateful to learn more about EPOC, in part because we are currently on the lookout for a non-executive director to add to our board, and we are trying to be as intentional as we can about ensuring that we grow the diversity of our board. I guess a couple final points that I'm going to walk away from this conversation with. I think we can proactively look to shift the market. I think a little bit about how we've worked with recruiters over the years. This is maybe not relevant to a search for a board director role, but thinking a bit about our engagement with recruiters for directors at the executive level for Moonshot. We have basically started telling recruiters, if we work with them, we will not accept any lists of candidates that don't have the, a kind of expected breakdown across a range of different characteristics. It's a little bit tricky as to how to do that, even within the bounds of what's legal when you're talking about protected characteristics. But we have basically required recruitment firms to give us lists that are ethnically, racially, and gender diverse. And if they don't do that, we just stop working with them. And that's our, we are one company, but that's, our little way of making a dent within the recruitment field is by showing that actually, no, you're not going to get Moonshot's money if you're unable to provide us with a diverse candidate list. So I think there's kind of small ways that we can pressure all of those external agencies and external partners that we rely on in order to build diverse companies. There's small ways we can pressure others to kind of take this seriously and do this with us. But I guess my kind of major takeaway is we have to be intentional about this. It's going to be hard, especially for small companies, but it's worth the hard work to get this right.
Excellent, thank you. I don't mind. Alison, do you want to go next?
Sure. Vidya, I would completely agree with you. I think the thing we've seen in listed businesses shift the dial the most has been the Parker report and the response to that in the UK. And I think there's intentionality and through to even setting out an ambition and targets, whether that be collectively or individually as an investor or a company, that does really force and focus on this issue. So I would encourage that. That would be my dial shift. Sharad.
Great, thank you. And the last word to Karen, yours.
Thank you. I'm going to take a liberty and maybe suggest two things, but the first one, just when you think about the board and the board construction over time, it's worth keeping in mind, not every board member has to be recruited at a specific time and event for a specific purpose. So often we'll have, when we invest in a company, the chair is one of the first roles that we fill, but you don't always need to go recruit a chair. So if you're looking at your board and you feel like you can see there's not enough diversity in it, you can just go recruit a non-executive director who is there, not necessarily to chair the board, but to bring in a specific area of either expertise, whether it be sector expertise or operational expertise or something that could even just be a foil to the founder, somebody who can be kind of their ear. And you can do that at any time. And I would do this with a lot of caution because just adding to your board is not a great idea. It needs to be with purpose and with a view of what you want to get from that individual. But it doesn't have to be driven by, we've just got a fundraise or we're going to a new market or we need a chair. So if you feel like the board is relatively samey and you're interested in expanding it, there's no reason you couldn't go to somebody like an Alison and say, help us here. And if you can't find the candidate you want, there's not an urgent need that you have to assign somebody to a chair role, for example. If you can't find that diversity now, try again at another time. So it doesn't always need to be an event-driven thing that you look to expand the board or diversify the board. And I think just the second thing would be find the one or two super connectors, and the super connectors could be Sharad or Vidya or Alison, but somebody I know that this person has a diverse network of smart people. So when I want to start doing something, I'm going to go ask them for suggestions too. Because once you've got one or two of those super connectors, you have a good place to start.
I think that's an excellent idea because I think, you're talking about the network effect. You're talking about how that person who you might bring on might have sort of 10 other sort of connections, and that can just sort of help fuel this sort of surge. So I think that's excellent. I mean, I remember in my board, we had a combination of technologists, we had a combination of private equity people, we had a combination of strategy people and people from compliance and investors. And so I have to say, I was not selected on the board because I was a person of color. I was selected because of my skill, my work in the private equity industry. But increasingly, if I was making introductions to, the team, the firm, then they were being, very, very receptive, I guess, because they worked with me, they understand, what I bring to the table. And if I sort of make a recommendation to people, then they would take it seriously. So I think that is a very good way. That's a great way to make introductions and, use a pipeline. My other sort of suggestion is, I think it is always wise to have a watch list, for the board, to have potential candidates, and where you don't have to necessarily sort of, hire them immediately. But if you have a running watch list of various people, but, kind of make a slightly concerted effort, because again, we have the time and the space to do so. Make an effort to actually try and sort of look a bit deeper and see if we can find people, who are from, who are basically diverse. I think that is another idea that, should be worth thinking about. So,
Gerard, can I just add to that, which is that's certainly something, if you cast your mind back to when people were thinking about putting women on boards, and that was becoming something that was a real focus. So that's certainly what many investors did, was build pools of deep female talent that they wanted to work with, and look across their portfolio to say what organizations, when is there an opportunity for one of our organizations to bring on this amazing female. So I think there's an opportunity to replicate that going forward as well.
Perfect. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to hand this back to Henry now. We've got a bunch of questions, Henry.
Yes. Yeah, we've got lots of questions to get through. So apologies, Sharad, for cutting you off there, but I'm eager to try and get through as many of these as we possibly can. But apologies to anyone who does ask a question who we can't quite get to within the time. We'll try and follow up afterwards. We've had a few questions, and maybe Karen, Sharad, this is sort of questions for you. What are the best ways, I think this is particularly coming from people in the EPOC network, what are the best ways to kind of start getting startup experience that would look, therefore, like an appropriate board role in future? Is it an observer role? Is it advising companies? Is it angel investing? What's a sort of good way to kind of dip the toe in the water of startup land? Maybe Karen first.
Sure. So we are always on the lookout for strong board members. There are a number of core board executives that we've worked with, quite a lot that are pretty good but not outstanding, and a small number that are really outstanding. So we're constantly on the lookout for that outstanding set. And I would say it's worth getting in touch with venture capital firms earlier rather than later, just to be part of their kind of panel and their network. It's also useful to target companies. So if there's a company you admire that you've seen and you say, actually, that's really interesting, and I think I could add value there, there's no reason not to go directly to the founders and their backers, whether it's private equity or VC. I would just say, when you have a conversation with somebody like us, the door is almost always open, but it's especially open if you can be really specific about what you can offer. So what is less helpful is coming to us and saying, I have a great background, a strong skill set. I'd love to be used somewhere. In large part, we're busy and lazy. And in order to try and figure out where to put you, that means we have to kind of go through all of our portfolio companies, figure out what skills they're missing, try and match that up to your background, and figure out where the easiest or best place for you to add value is. The most useful thing is to come and say, this is my background. I'm smart and capable. This is what I've done. What I can do for an early stage company is, and then fill in the blank there. It could be something like, is help a company transition from manual processes to automation at scale, or help a company go from selling in Europe to entering the US market and finding the commercial relationships there, or helping a company develop its Salesforce team and go to market, or helping a company with its organizational structure and future. So, or it might be deep sector expertise in cybersecurity, for example. So basically feed us the answer, tell us what kind of role to put you in, and it's much easier for us to either find that now or in the future.
Yeah,
Great,
I would
thank
agree.
you, Karen. Sharad.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. I think, angel investing can be a risky sort of route. I'm not so sure you can get a huge amount of active involvement just by being a passive investor. I think people have to be careful not to sort of lose money for the sake of trying to get onto boards. But what I will say is, if one is specific, as Karen said, certainly in my world where I come from, strategy and finance and effectively commercial, be very articulate and clear about, where one can exactly sort of add value. And normally, let me tell you what startups are looking for, right? Startups typically, have a huge paucity, effectively, of high quality talent in sales, high quality talent in perhaps even tech in some cases, high quality talent in digital transformation. What they probably don't need is, a huge amount of, financial control and sort of numbers. They might do so, but I think understanding the product in which you want to sort of invest time into, and getting a really good understanding, and then talking to VCs and setting out your case is a good starting point.
Henry, is it okay for me to piggyback
Sure.
off of that and just add
Of course,
something?
please do, yeah.
So I'm thinking a little bit as a company in J.'s portfolio that also, we do have an open NED seat, and it's something that has been an active discussion between myself and my co-founder around the right skills and gaps that need to be filled by that individual, in addition to the skills we need. And Moonshot as a business is launching our first SaaS product, so there's some very clear experience that we would like from that additional board member, having been with companies that are transitioning towards SaaS. In addition to those skills, there's also just a humility, a recognition of what you do and don't know, and actually as a starting point, the ability to listen. And that's why, Sharad, what you were saying is so important, being able to just sit down with founders and understand what are the problems they're facing, what is the product in depth, what are their challenges, to be able to avoid cookie cutter solutions. We have been approached over the past several years by folks who are very, very interested, keen in joining our board. And one of the main reasons why we don't pursue some of those conversations is because folks come, don't listen, and then try and give us cookie cutter solutions that we just think are not right for the business. So I just wanted to emphasize that even beyond the skills and the experience is actually a person who's going to be a bit humble, be there on the journey with the founders. One of the main reasons why our board members are so effective is because they are truly members of our team. They are on the journey with us. They're there through the ups and downs. And I'd rather have a board member who's on the journey with me rather than parachuting in with advice that's unlikely to work for us as a business and us as founders.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks. And Vidya, if I may just come back to you quickly. We've had a few questions around different types of diversity. I know you were talking earlier about some of the surveys that you run as a company, but could you just sort of talk us through potentially sort of how you think about the different types of people you want in your organization, that maybe actually also different racial backgrounds and what that might add to your company or board in future. But then also, I think we've had a couple of questions around sort of intersectionality. So that maybe people, sort of different socioeconomic backgrounds. Could you just talk a little bit about what you typically look at and how that feeds into your growth as an organization?
Diversity is a huge word with lots of different facets. And so, yeah, you've already listed some, Henry, of the kind of characteristics or areas of diversity that we're concerned about. So there's, of course, racial and ethnic diversity. There's disability and ability diversity. There's religious diversity. There's, socioeconomic diversity. And perhaps maybe less discussed these days, but important is political diversity as well. As a business that operates in highly politicized spaces, we are increasingly thinking about what it means for us as an organization to actually have different perspectives on key issues that we work. So, I've been talking for the last couple of hours on panels, so I might be losing my voice. But we think about this holistically. And I think maybe the advice that I would leave everyone with is to let yourself be surprised about the results. If you do go out and try and seek data on this, we do anonymized surveys. And one of the areas that we found that we're weakest on, for example, is socioeconomic diversity. And that's an area that our Director of People and Culture has now been increasingly emphasizing it. It's not something that's always visible, right? Ethnic and racial diversity is often visible. You can kind of see it and feel it. And for many of the other aspects of diversity, it's not always going to be the most visible. So I do think we need to go out and get the data on diversity across the spectrum to truly know where we sit as companies.
That's great. Thank you, Vidya. Sharad, did you have anything to add to that?
I just wanted to say it's an excellent point about going and getting the data. Right, I was going to wrap the session up towards the end by saying, is it worth getting the data? And if it is worth getting the data, who's going to do it? So, that's just an open question. I don't have any answers, but, I would welcome, Alison and Karen, and, is it a good idea? And, should we be sort of finding somebody who can kind of get this piece of work done?
Well, I suppose on that point, Sharad, I would plug the work that we deliver with ESG. We've built a measurement framework for looking at the broad aspects of ESG across early stage companies, but a key part of that is obviously the diversity of boards, leadership teams, and then the wider workforce. So do check out our website, esgbc.co.uk, download the framework, have a think about how it might work within your organizations if you're a startup or an investor. Alison, maybe I can just quickly turn to you for one of the questions that's been cropping up around sort of effectively what makes a good board member within a startup. What are the types of sort of qualities, characteristics that you often see within sort of requests from your clients, typically if you're sort of working on a brief?
Yeah, there's a question I think that's come up about potential too, so I may cover that off if that's okay, Henry.
Yeah, of course.
So if we go back to what we were talking about earlier, and you come with a very specific brief about a spike, what makes a great board member is someone who has something they're really excellent at, but can contribute broadly as well, in our view. So someone who listens, thinks about the business end to end, and contributes end to end, but also brings expertise along an area that's really needed by the organization. But then you have all sorts of soft skills. Vidya has highlighted some of them. I think listening for a growth business is really important, because you're in an environment where the business is changing, decisions are being made about where the organization's going on a daily basis, and to come in and say, this is exactly what needs to be done, that's not what people are looking for in board members of growth businesses. It is much more listening, providing expertise, providing support. So that's what we look for. Just on the point about potential that's come up in a number of questions, I think it's a really important point. Most board members don't come onto boards fully formed, and certainly the board chairs have a responsibility to support particularly first-time NEDs to reach their full potential. And so I would link this potential point with the intentionality we've been talking about bringing diversity onto the board. And I think the board chairs and investors really, and we do as well, should be looking for potential and thinking about what is someone's trajectory and how are they going to grow into this role. I think we all have responsibility there.
And Alison, if I may, just sort of one additional question. Have you seen anyone sort of do this particularly well? Sort of any companies, clients, even organizations that sort of think about this diversity problem on boards particularly well?
I think if you go to the FTSE businesses are probably most advanced on thinking about this, Henry, in terms of really thinking about how do they bring on ethnic diversity onto the board. It sort of goes back to something I was saying. I think the best thing to do is be intentional about it, and to be not just say that we want to see it and then not be held responsible to it, but really look for it on every search. Where it's really challenging is when people say, I need exactly this, and this is I need one person who is also ethnically diverse. Actually, far better, every search, make it a priority to potentially bring on a person of color into your board or into exec roles as well.
That's great, thank you. we've obviously had loads of questions about how people attending today can sort of connect with you all. Maybe Karen, if I can sort of ask a quick question of you, what's the best way for, you know, either, I suppose, founders in the room looking for advice, or even maybe some of the EPOC network who are looking to sort of connect with VCs in general, what are the best sort of forums for doing that?
Yeah, so I think network and make sure you're out there. So at a minimum, if you are looking, I would say email your CV after this call to myself, Sharad, Allison, Vidya, and let all of us know that you're looking for board roles, because you never know where it's going to come from. Founders talk to each other. Vidya might have a conversation with somebody and she might have just seen your CV. Sharad obviously is investing in companies. Allison as a headhunter might be almost your best bet in terms of making sure that your CV is on profile with Heidrick. For us, we are almost, I would say most VCs are very open to approaches for this, because we are desperate to find great board members. And if there's an ethnic diversity, then obviously there's even greater demand. But best thing, send a CV and a really short email just highlighting, here are the skills that I could bring to a board or to a company, and asking for 15 or 20 minutes of time for a quick call. We can almost always say yes to. If you ask for an hour kind of face-to-face interview, first we need to figure out where you would go, do we have an immediate opportunity, etc. So I would say just reach out to everybody, let people know that you're interested, because it's all about timing. Your skill set has to match with the company's need at the time that they're looking to expand the board. So just make sure you're kind of constantly present. There isn't, I'd love to have here's the database that you put your CV in and then you'll be top of mind. But I would say they haven't traditionally worked for us. There are a number of companies that have tried to start databases, but they haven't really taken off for a variety of reasons. So I would say go direct, and really I'd look for companies or portfolios that you're interested in. So if you go onto the Berengia website or any VC or private equity firm's website, we have a profile of here's the businesses we're interested in. If those look particularly interesting to you, that's a great firm to talk to regularly. And if you send us a CV and we don't get back to you right away, do it again in a couple of weeks. Sometimes people just get busy, but we never get, like, we're hungry for what you have to offer, basically. And then if you find Moonshot to be an incredibly interesting business, there's no reason not to send Vidya an email directly, or any of the portfolio companies.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with all of that. I think, reach out. And like Karen said, if she doesn't get back, or if I don't get back immediately, then, we will get back, or, send us a reminder. You have our sort of details, you have our platform. I'm very happy to sort of act as a channel, if you may, for, members at EPOC. In fact, we've done that before, where if people have come to us and said that, we're looking to fill up a board position in a certain role, can you sort of introduce a member? We have then, sort of sent the very specific board spec to the EPOC community, found out who might be keen, and then, link them up.
And Vidya, any sort of useful platforms, organizations, networks for people to connect directly with founders, or is it okay for people to come to you direct? Are you going through advisors?
Well, I know we're here to talk about diversity of board members, but there are a number of networks out there specifically for founders with diverse backgrounds, and so that's something that's a series of communities that I try and get as much value from, but also there's a number of communities in that space that I'm sure the EPOC group would benefit from being connected in with. So Henry, I'm happy to share a list maybe that can go around to the group of some of those networks that I've engaged with in the past.
That would be great. Thank you, Vidya. And then Alison, for sort of search firms for Heidrick, what's the best way for people to get in touch? Is it sort of just direct approaches? Should they be networking with a bunch of different firms? Should they be just coming direct to you?
Yeah, share your CV with all the firms. They will, remits go to different people at different times. You want to be on the radar of the people who are doing this work and doing board work. There will be a board practice in every of the major headhunters. Reach out to the board practice, or reach out to the person who does executive work in your area of special focus, SaaS, consumer tech, etc. Get to know them, share your CV, and they will keep you in mind as board roles come in.
Sharad, did you have something to add to that? I think you're just on mute, Dave. I think you're still on mute, Sharad.
I would just say that join EPOC. EPOC is an open-ended platform. It's not a closed platform. Become a guest. If you like it, become a member. But, by all means, I have probably met, I can tell you personally, all the sort of leading headhunters in the City of London, thanks to EPOC in the last 6 months, who I did not know prior to my association with EPOC. So I have personally found it to be of immense value.
And Sharad, how does somebody do that? Do they just go to the website? Is there
that's a very good question. No, they don't. You can go to the website, but by all means, if people want to sort of sign up as a guest and then there is a qualification criteria for becoming a member, which is not very difficult. I mean, there's got to be an interest, there's got to be a requirement to become a board NED. But very happy to sort of use my details and either get in touch with EPOC directly or feel free to reach out to me, and I will connect that particular person with Moni and and her team.
And Sharad, in the other direction, I suppose, I think we've had a couple of questions from founders and CEOs on the call who are just looking to understand how they might then tap into EPOC's network of leaders.
I think that's, again, a brilliant question. I would welcome those founders to reach out to myself or Moni, and then that would be the first port of call, because then we will be able to understand the requirement and make sure we're not sort of sending people their way, which ultimately is a bit of a waste of time for them, right? So we want to sort of match the spec, if you may, and then make sure that we kind of be efficient about who we propose. And if we don't have anyone, then we can be quite clear that we don't have someone at the moment, but and then we might want to get in touch with some of the headhunting firms who we know, and we know all of them now in the City of London, and would certainly reach out to them and see if they can perhaps help.
I think we're pretty much out of time. So I'm really sorry to anyone who did ask a question who we didn't quite get round to tackling. On behalf of ESG VC, I obviously just want to say huge thanks to everyone who joined today. A huge thank you to all of our panelists. I've mentioned our website. We'll follow up over email with lots more details of places to look for information. Hopefully all the panelists are comfortable sharing their email addresses. I think I've just volunteered you. But just thank you again for everyone who's participated. Sharad, any sort of final words on behalf of EPOC?
No, I just like to say a big thank you to Karen, Vidya, Alison for joining. A big thank you to Henry for sort of organizing this, putting it all together. It's been a fantastic combination between ESG VC and EPOC, two great sort of communities of people. And, frankly, these are the sorts of partnerships that I think can deliver real change. So, with that, thank you. Have a good sort of morning, afternoon, and evening.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you
so much, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.